Hey guys, welcome back. Sorry, just adjusting the camera a little bit. Sorry, it doesn't look great. This is the last of our branches of feminist theory. After this, we will kind of the authors of our chapter have tried to stitch together a what they call a sociological feminist theory or a feminist sociological theory that's kind of more general. That's going to take elements of all of these branches and kind of try to weave them together into a really good coherent framework for analyzing society in a thoroughly feminist way. Um, and this one's going to be a big step in that direction. This is intersectional theory, I'm sorry, intersectionality theory. It's another theory of structural oppression, which basically says, um, uh, where are the women? Well, they are experiencing oppression based on the structure of society, and depending on different dimensions or what we're going to call vectors of oppression and privilege, race, class, gender, obviously, but sexual orientation, um, age, all of those things, you could, each of, depending on the variables there, you're going to create different experiences of oppression. So it's that idea of the intersection of a bunch of different variables. Um, so that's kind of the starting point for us is women's experience of oppression depends on the configuration of a bunch of those variables. In my intro classes, I talk about the social location, not physical location, but social location. So we can think about locating somebody on the dimension of race and on the dimension of gender and on the dimension of age and on the dimension of sexuality and the way they intersect. Tells a story about specifically how that person is going to experience oppression. It's different for a white woman than a black woman, and it's different for a straight black woman than a gay black woman. And you know, you kind of get where I'm going with this. So each of those, as I said before, are called vectors of oppression and privilege. Um, what I want to do, and that's the basic story of intersectionality theory. I mean, that's it. Is depending on those socially important variables, your experience of oppression will vary. Where I want to go now is into the idea of how that functions, how that oppression and the experience of oppression functions in terms of kind of three different levels. In fact, I kind of wish I would have written it as 1, 2, and 3. From the most general, this is how it works compared to the dominant group, to how does it work within a marginalized group, to how does it work within a marginalized individual. So, to begin with, dominance, and this is the term that is used in the textbook. People in the dominant group use differences to oppress people. That's not particularly surprising or interesting. Uh, what is slightly more so is the idea that there's only, if you recall, there's only less than 38% of Americans would really qualify as dominant on multiple different dimensions. So if we start out with just white and male, we're at 38%. If we think about the fact that a significant number of those men are going to be LGBTQ, then we're going to take that down into the mid to lower 30s. So we're talking about in terms of dominant on multiple dimensions, we're talking about a third maybe of people in our society who dominate 2/3 of the people in society. Well, how is that possible? I mean, it makes no sense. Uh, and the answer has to do with the fact that dominant people use differences to keep marginalized groups from getting together. So it's not just white males trying to keep black people subjugated. It's making sure that black people and Latino people don't bond together. It's making sure that working class white people who are, I guess if you were thinking about that class definition, it's going to take that 33-ish% down, possibly even into the 20s. But how do we make sure working class people don't end up bonding with racial minorities to, again, create a more just and equitable society? Well, it's using difference to divide marginalized groups. So that's one way in which this intersectionality is used to create oppression. It is used by dominant groups to keep marginalized groups from saying, hey, we're all in the same boat. Well, that's it. So that's what dominant groups do, using differences to oppress. Within a marginalized group, though, there's another issue that happens, which is, and this is not done by the dominant group, but marginalized people, to the extent that they internalize these vectors of oppression, they are likely to, or at least potentially, will turn against members of their own group. So if you think about within a racial minority category, if to be LGBTQ is a vector of oppression in our society, then it could be used to divide a particular racial group. So it's not just all of us together, it's, well, all of us straight people together, and you LGBTQ people can go do your own thing. And again, it dilutes the power, because power is in numbers. So a second way in which these vectors of oppression are used within a society to oppress and to make the experience a negative experience for people. And third is what a feminist, actually a black gay feminist author named Audre Lorde called internalization of the mythical or a mythical norm. And what that means is the idea of saying, well, I've used this example before. When I talked about Marx, I said, well, when you think of a worker, what do you think of? Well, in Marx's time, what usually would come up would be a white man. That's what she means by a mythical norm. That's not really necessarily the norm. If I were to say, what is, like, picture a worker right now, and you were to think of a white male, we've already talked about the fact that white males in and of themselves are only 38% of the population. That's not the normal worker. So that's what Audre Lorde meant by a mythical norm. But here's the issue. That internalization of the mythical norm, in this case it's about workers, but it could also be about beauty standards or whatever. To the extent that people internalize that mythical norm, it involves or can operate to make people devalue themselves. It's like an internalization of the rejection of a particular group, but you're in that particular group. So we went from dominant people oppressing to marginalized groups oppressing a marginalized group within their marginalized group. And now it's individuals sort of enacting their own oppression by internalizing this mythical norm. 3 different levels. All of them horrible. All right. To end intersectionality theory, one of the reasons that I really, really like it is it takes where we started out, which is let's understand society from the perspective of the oppressed majority, women. And it says, we can do more than that. Yeah, that clarifies a lot about the way our society works. But what if we look at it from the perspective of a black transgender woman? What do we see then? The more variables we add, I'm not going to say that it gives us a better picture, but each variable that we add shows us something else. It's like a different angle on this thing called society. And it helps us understand what are the structures, how is society being set up that leads to the oppression of all people, But we do it by figuring it out one little piece at a time, which I personally think is a pretty cool way of using this idea of intersectionality. Um, Bam, I think that's it. That ends all of our branches of feminism. So we've dealt with difference theory. We dealt with 4 of them. We dealt with a couple of inequality theories. We dealt with a couple of straight up oppression theories, and now we've dealt with 2 structural oppression theories. That's, I believe, 10 different feminist theories. I mean, you guys are going to know more about this than pretty much anybody. What we're going to do in the next video, maybe 2, depending on how quickly I can get through it, is say, okay, so what have feminist sociologists picked from each of these to bond together into a feminist sociological theory? Most of the other ones that we've talked about are feminist sociological theories, but what can we draw if we want to take the best out of all of these and have just our one coherent picture? What's the best? That's where we're going next. I'll see you guys then.